Hi everyone, Stepan here. I'm going to show you my round 4 game played in Bošnjaci. If you saw my previous video, you'll know that I didn't play rounds 2 and 3 because I had some kind of flu, whatever. They were both played on day 2 and I just couldn't get out of bed. Round 4 I did decide to play even though I was feeling only slightly better. I was facing an opponent rated 1700 and as you know, my New Year's resolution, or part of it, is not to play the London system anymore. So I played pawn to e4. And my opponent usually plays the Petrov against e4, and he did it this time too. Knight f3, knight f6, and I went for d4. Now d4 is very interesting. This is the modern variation, or the modern attack. And I've played it once before, and I won. So far, up to this game, this was going well, and I did a lot of study on this variation. So I was prepared for pretty much anything that could happen up to move 20, and I didn't expect my opponent to be as booked up as I was. Okay, so the critical move, of course, is knight e4, and white continues bishop to d3, and black defends the knight with d5, and white takes on e5. So basically, this is a symmetrical position if black goes bishop d6, which is something he'd played before twice. But white is the first one to get in c4, and then knight c3, and then castle, and the queen comes out to h5. Obviously, neither of us has a knight on f3 or on f6, so these are kind of tender. And whoever can start an attack first is better. Now the main move is knight to d7, and the variation goes knight d7, bishop d7, castles. This is my previous game in this variation. Black goes bishop d6, white goes c4, undermining this knight, and c6 takes knight c3, forcing black to take. And after black castles, white is the first one to get in queen h5. In that game, my opponent played pawn to f5, which is okay if you understand the follow-up, but it's very risky. The main move is g6, allowing queen takes d5, and then white will lose that extra pawn later on. There's a ton of theory there. However, in this position, my opponent played the move knight f6. And strategically, this is a bad move, because the e4 square is what white is trying to undermine, precisely because the knight is on e4. So if you voluntarily move the knight back, then what's the point? You're just a tempo down. And after castles, it would make very little sense to play bishop d6, which seems like the best move, and black would like to start undermining the knight on e5. But then you run into pins with bishop g5, so my opponent's next move is understandable, bishop e7. Okay, I played bishop g5 anyway, and that's fine. He played pawn to h6, I played bishop h4, and he played bishop e6. Now this is a risky move, and white is already significantly better. There were two variations I was looking at in this position, and I wasn't sure which one to go for. Before I show you the variations, I would like to thank the sponsor of today's video, Chessbook. If you're looking for a way to make studying your repertoire easier, Chessbook is a great solution. It helps you work on your repertoire in a very easy and understandable way. I'm a grandmother for computers, and if something is easy to use for me, then it's going to be very easy for you guys who actually know what you're doing. So Chessbook allows you to import your repertoire, either by hand like this. Let's say I go to my black repertoire, edit something else, and let's say I want to edit something against e4. And let's go with the Caro-Kann because that's my repertoire, and let's go for the advanced variation. Now, the way you do this, you just play the moves that you wish to play. I always play bishop f5. And now you can import knight f3, knight c3, h4. Let's import the short variation of the advanced Caro-Kann. So in this position, I go knight bd7, they castle, I go knight here. Now they can play several different things, but let's say knight bd2. And in this position, I go knight c8. Okay, knight c8. I can keep adding moves. And once you do that for your entire repertoire, you're all set. Alternatively, you can import a PGN of your repertoire, which is way easier, which is what I did with the modern variation of the Petrov for this video as my white repertoire. So you import your repertoire, you save the moves, And now what you can do is you can practice your repertoire, or you can review your online games based on your repertoire. So you connect your Lichess and chess.com accounts to Chessbook, and then based on your repertoire, Chessbook is going to find mistakes in your games and force you to fix them. Okay, another feature you can go for is practicing your repertoire, and this is by far the most important one and what I use the most. Based on your repertoire that you've imported, Chessbook is going to allow you to practice those moves. So let's go practice. Let's say everything that's due for review, and as white I go e4. My opponent plays e5, so I've imported the Petrov for this video. So knight f3, knight f6, I go d4, which is the modern. They take, I go bishop d3. I take on e5, and now against knight f6, I castle. So I think this is good. Alternatively, what else do I do? I don't know, maybe bishop g5 is okay. Okay, and against bishop d6, I'm pretty sure I would castle. Okay, maybe this is just a line that I've added to the study, but basically, it allows you to practice the repertoire you've imported. If you don't know, you can just say, show me the answer. Yeah, logical, knight g4. Okay, so Chessbook is extremely easy to navigate. You can practice your repertoire, you can connect it to your online accounts, and there's a new feature that's playing through a model game based on your repertoire, which is basically solitaire chess, which I use all the time, basically trying to guess the player's next moves, but everything is ideal. You don't have to deal with the logistics of covering a book with a notebook or whatever else. So you can play it through a model game from your repertoire and learn a lot. If you don't play what the players played, then it's going to correct you. Okay, so what I'm using is a premium account, which is about $5 a month. Most of what I did here you can do with the basic account too. You can find the link to Chessbook in the description below. Visit them if you want to support them, get the premium membership. It's definitely worth it. Thank you very much, guys. See you later. Okay, so I played knight d2, which is fine, and white should be about +1. But the other idea I had was queen e2, because this basically prevents castling, and I'm not sure what else black can do. Black can try c5, but that seems kind of risky because it cannot be taken. If takes, then the bishop is not defending e6 or this file anymore, so maybe there will be knight f7 ideas in the future, or even knight g6 immediately. This seems very risky. Other than that, if he tries to develop his knight to c6 or to d7, again, I may have ideas of knight g6. So queen e2 is connected to undermining this bishop with knight g6. So if he doesn't castle, that trick still exists. If he does castle, I still go knight g6. And I was expecting the move rook e8, and I was going to take the bishop on e7, and I was expecting the queen to recapture. But even though I have the bishop pair, I wasn't sure I had such a big advantage. The engine gives f4 as the best move here. I'm pretty sure I would have played knight d2. If you turn on the engine, it says knight d2 is almost equal after knight c6. The engine only likes the move f4, and I was going to go f4 followed by f5, but I couldn't really see the point. And again, I'm facing a low-rated opponent, so I don't want to trade pieces. So I didn't go for that. I just kept the tension. And to be honest, I wanted him to blunder with knight b to d7, which is exactly what he played. You don't want to go knight c6 because of takes, and c5 again is risky because you're not covering the e file enough. So I played knight d2 hoping for knight b d7, and he played knight b d7. And of course, my idea to punish this was to go f4, and basically I'm threatening to win a piece. If nothing is done, then I just go f5 and win. So the way I was expecting him to play is knight takes e5, and now I have a very pleasant choice between f takes and d takes. To be honest, I was going to take with the f pawn, but I'm not sure what's better. I think the engine slightly prefers d takes e5, but it's only marginally better. The idea is that you still have f5 as a follow-up, but you're giving away a lot of your center, and this bishop could come to d5, and I wasn't sure I wanted to do that, because if my attack doesn't work, then I'm not better. So on f takes e5, firstly I gain a tempo, the knight has to move back to d7, and I can just go bishop f2. And after something like c5, c3, I have long-term pressure on f7, the knight is never coming back. And also, if you can imagine my bishops on d3 and d3, there is a ton of pressure on black's king side, so I was going to do that. Alternatively, what can black do? I should mention that g5 doesn't work. This is the only thing I was trying to calculate despite my fever. I was really struggling to focus and to calculate. My vision was blurry and I felt really bad, but I had to calculate this precisely. Of course, not f takes, not winning a pawn, that's just bad, because if you take and takes and takes and, I don't know, takes, the knight moves somewhere, eventually the queen moves away. For example, bishop takes, castles, queen side, white is under a lot of pressure. But instead of that, f5 just winning immediately. The variations of note are, for example, gh4 followed by fe6, and now I don't know what you do as black. If you play fe6, I go bishop g6 and win immediately. If you go knight e5, for example, I don't know. After knight e5, I can just go d5, and after the knight moves, f7 is under pressure, so this is pointless. So after f5, taking the bishop doesn't work. If you take the knight, it's even worse. I just go d takes, and after the bishop moves away, then just bishop f2, and the knight is hanging. If knight g8, for example, then queen h5, and e6 is coming, f7 is going to cave in, black is just going to lose. What else? I mean, if bishop f5, hoping to recapture this bishop, then bishop takes f5, and after gh4, just bishop takes f7, and f7 is for bishop takes d7, and f7 is caving in. So, for example, takes, knight f7, and white wins. So on f4, g5 cannot be played. That was the main thing. I was expecting knight e5 with an advantage, but my opponent played knight b6, which is just a bad move. It's the easiest way to save your bishop, but it allows f5. And after f5, bishop d7. Here I was struggling to find the plan. I couldn't make any attacking ideas work, so I just played queen f3. And the engine says this is the best move. I mean, it makes sense from a human perspective. You want to go rook e1, and the queen is just good on this diagonal. Especially if this unfortunate knight ever decides to move. Maybe I can just take on f6, take on d5. So my opponent played c5. And this is a losing blunder, but I did not capitalize on this. I didn't win the game here. It's actually fairly easy to see why. And I was looking at the correct move, dc5. So dc5, bishop c5 check is pretty much forced, and after king h1, this is winning because black cannot castle. And if black doesn't castle straight away, then if for example queen c7, then rook e1 castles queenside, and I just take on f7. So after king h1, there are no moves for black. Maybe castles is the best move, but that just loses by force. If castles, the correct continuation is knight g4. And I couldn't figure this out over the board. I was looking at bishop e7 as the only move, and the engine says this is +4 for white. And of course I was looking at giving up the exchange, which is absolutely correct. I was expecting rook e8, and then rook takes, and rook takes. And of course I can take on f6, so I was looking at bishop f6, gf6 followed by queen h3 or knight f6, and this is completely winning. I just couldn't visualize everything correctly. For example, if knight f6, let's say king h8, queen h5, queen f8 is the only solution to this, and now just rook f3, and black's position is falling apart. If queen g7 attacking the knight, then just queen h4 followed by rook h3. In fact, the engine says the best move here is rook e1 check. Alternatively, if in this position, after rook e7, black takes with the queen, I think it's even worse because of bishop f6, gf6, and queen h3. And again, queen f8 is the best move, but now just knight f6. So after c5, I'm guessing this would have happened if I had taken on c5. I wasn't good enough to... I was actually good enough to see the ideas of the rook sack on e7 and knight g4, but I wasn't good enough to assess them correctly as completely winning. So I went for something else, which in my mind was less risky, which is absurd. This position is about +2 according to the engine, and it went to all zeros after what I did, and I still find that unbelievable. So I took on f6. Now if he takes with the bishop, I think he's in trouble. If bishop takes f6, then I can just go dc5 or knight g6 maybe. Knight g6 is also pretty fine. So for example, if knight g6 and if this is taken, then rook a1, and he has to move the king to f8 probably, and then fg6 seems like a completely devastating position. Or after bishop takes f6, I can just take on c5, and if bishop takes e5, then rook a1 is again winning. If f6, I have queen h5, and his position is falling apart. Queen h5 followed by knight f3. So bishop f6, I knew that he had to take with the g-pawn, and my idea was to take on d7. He takes with the queen, and I take on c5 now. Where after bishop takes c5 check, king h1, my idea was that his only move was castles queenside, and that's correct. Okay, so he did. And the whole point behind bishop f6 was to go a4. Okay, so before I'd gone bishop takes f6 on move 13, this is now move 17, I was calculating 6 moves deep from this position. And the only variation of note I had to calculate was what happens if the pawn is taken. So my calculation went knight takes a4, and at first I couldn't decide between rook a2 and rook fb1, but I decided to go rook a2, save my pawn. And then I was expecting bishop b6 to give the knight c5. I was going to go c4, which is correct. Looking at b7, this has to be taken, and now bishop e4. Okay, so I'm giving up this knight for this one and for the b7 pawn. And after queen d2, bishop b7, king b8, rook takes, I just figured this was okay for me. This king is completely exposed, but the engine says this is dead equal, and that I made a huge mistake. I allowed my opponent to equalize from a completely winning position for me. Again, a mistake assessing this. I was calculating up to this point on move 13. This is move 22. So I couldn't visualize everything correctly, probably, or even if I could, I'd missed that this bishop is so strong. It's almost impossible to break through to the black king with this bishop still keeping guard. But my opponent did not take the pawn. And I was kind of hoping this wouldn't happen because I saw that I was winning straight away if he doesn't take. Alternatively, he can move the queen or move the king to give the knight a square. He moved the king to b8, hoping to blockade on d6, but this just doesn't work. Of course, I go a5, and after the knight moves, I go a6. If the pawn is taken, white is winning on the spot with rook takes, followed by rook a1. And if the pawn advances, like he did in the game, I have this diagonal, and long term, this is just game over. Basically, from this position on, I was waiting for my opponent to resign. If you turned on the engine, it's going to say +1.5. So it's not completely winning according to the engine, but from a human perspective, this cannot be defended. Okay, so I continued knight b3. I want to take on c5. It's as simple as that, and why not? I mean, if I get rid of this bishop, nothing's saving the king. I can just continue b4 or c4. So he played queen c7. I took on c5, he took with the queen. And now I, in a second, played c4. Of course, c4 is a mate threat. If the pawn is taken, queen b7 is checkmate. So c4 seemed to just win a pawn. I figured he doesn't have an easy way to defend. The engine wants to play something very strange, which I didn't even consider. The engine plays queen g3, and after queen d6 plays queen g7, going for the doubled f7 pawn, and it actually has black defending the pawn with rook df8. Now, in what world would people play this? I don't know. This is a huge advantage to white. c4 is actually a mistake, and it's a big mistake because of something my opponent can do here. Which I'd missed completely. He can play rook h8, And now it's not simple at all because the rook is coming to e3. Black has a ton of activity and black's pieces are extremely good. In fact, much better than mine. And it's not even clear that my king is safe. Again, after c4, if the pawn is taken, queen b7 mate. He defended with rook d7, which is bad. Now white is better. I took on d5. He played rook h to d8. And this was my final mistake of the game. After this, I played well. I played bishop e4, but I wanted him to play knight d6. After bishop e4, then I was going to go back, and his knight is blocking his rooks. So alternatively, I could have gone for queen f4 and queen takes pawn, which is something I was looking at, and invite his queen to take on d5 to free up the diagonal. But I saw no reason to give up my pawn, so I played bishop e4. So of course, if he doesn't play knight d6, then, you know, I just keep my bishop here, play, for example, rook ac1 and try to break through. But he did play this, and I just went back. And now, of course, if he goes knight c8, I'm not going to repeat. But I was hoping the knight stays here for the moment so that I can organize my pieces, chase this queen around, and probably win the h6 pawn. He played h5. Now I could have taken this, the engine takes. I threw in rook ac1 because I want to get his queen away from my d pawn. I don't want to lose my d pawn yet because there's sufficient blockade. And with the knight on d6, I'm not mating him on b7, so I didn't want to give this up. My d pawn is basically keeping his king safe, but it's also keeping his rooks extremely inactive. He played queen b4, and I was extremely happy to trade my b pawn for his h pawn, so I took. Now what we have here is a position in which, even if I don't mate him, I win the endgame. If we trade queens, the endgames are just over for him, because I have an outside passed h pawn, and his pawns are dreadful, and I have a pawn on a6, which means that if my rook ever infiltrates on the second rank, it's going to be game over. So after this exchange b for h, I'm just winning regardless of whether we have an endgame or not. Okay, I played queen f3, just bringing my queen back, why not? He played rook h8, starting an attack, maybe. And this move I'm really proud of. I played queen g3. Queen g3 I think is a very good move. It's inviting him to play queen e5, which is a move he wanted to play previously, threatening mate. For if I don't go queen g3, let's say I go rook e1 and he plays queen e5. Well, let's not say rook e1. Let's say rook d1 and queen e5. Now queen g3 just loses the queen because the pawn is pinned. So I played queen g3 to prevent queen e5. Of course, if he plays queen e5, I take it and I have a completely winning endgame. For example, queen e5, f e5, I go g4 and just start pushing my pawns. After something like f6, I go rook c6, and if I'm black, I'm resigning this position because my plan is to get the king to g3, play h4, play g5, and just keep pushing. Black is extremely passive, and black's king is completely tied down, and I'm just gonna queen my pawn. So after queen g3, he couldn't go queen e5. Instead, he played rook d8. And now I can play rook c6, putting pressure on the pinned knight. Not only does queen g3 prevent queen e5, but it also pins the knight, which is important. And of course, he can never go king c8. And if he goes king a8, then his rooks cannot leave the back rank, because rook c8 would be mate. Instead of playing rook c6 straight away, or rook c2, I decided to go rook fe1. Since this pin is now very annoying and he cannot double his rooks anymore because he played rook dd8, I wanted to prevent a queen trade. Not only do I want to prevent a queen trade, I want to go rook e7. And not while my rook is hanging, but eventually. So now there's no hope for an attack anymore for him. He played queen b4, which I assume was to go queen h4 and trade queens, although he shouldn't do that, of course. A queen trade would be a disaster for him. So I played rook c4. I just decided to stop that. The knight's pinned and the queen has to move again. The queen went to a3, targeting my a6 pawn. And now I went rook c6. And the knight is pinned, the queen defends for now, and he unpinned with king a8, which is an extremely bad move. As I said, now the back rank is weak. Rook c8 is now checkmate. if these pieces move. So that's just another tactical liability he has to watch out for. Also, if my queen reaches the light squares, d6 is going to be game over. So now there are two tactical threats he has to be concerned about. And at this point, I just wanted to play a safe move. I wanted to get my king safe. The only problem I could face is back rank issues, which don't necessarily have to lead to mate, but I don't want to trade any major pieces either. I want to checkmate him. So I played h3. And now everything is safe. Now I'm never trading pieces. I'm never getting mated. He played rook h to g8. Okay, fine. I played queen e3. Of course, if I play queen e7, then he has to resign. So he played queen a2, which is a mate threat, distracting my queen. And now I wasn't sure what to do. I had three candidate moves: bishop e2, bishop f1, or queen f3. Bishop f1 seemed like the cleanest option. And I almost played it, but I chose queen f3 in the end. I didn't want to leave the third rank undefended. So I didn't want him to be able to go queen to the third rank at any point if my queen moves, because then there could be threats to take on h3. I know it sounds complicated, but I wanted to go queen f3 to just keep everything together, hold everything together. And again, I'm just threatening rook e7. So if I get to play rook e7 after I played h3, then it's an easy win. He played queen a3, which I didn't understand. He cannot take my pawn because the queen defends. But even if the queen weren't defending, if he takes the pawn, then I mean, I think this is far too risky. I can probably go rook c1 followed by queen e7. I think that should be good enough. Maybe even queen c1, but I'm not sure. I would have gone rook e c1. Okay, so I played queen f3. He played queen a3. I played rook e7, and now, if allowed, I'm just gonna get rid of all of his pieces and probably continue with something like queen e2 and take on d6 and then threaten rook e8. Okay, the engine here says king b8 is the best move, but even after king b8, I mean, I just go queen e3 or queen e2, and I don't know what he does. Now the engine says king a8 is the best move, and now rook c7, and he's not defending this. If he goes knight c8, then I just go d6, and eventually his position is going to collapse. But after rook e7, he played... he allowed me to finish the game in a very pleasurable way, let me put it this way. He played knight f5. And of course, knight f5 is a tricky move, because if I take the knight, he takes my rook. Not that that's not winning for me, it's still winning for me. But I have mate in 3, mate in 4 if he gives up the rook, and I played it immediately. I played the move rook c8 check, and he was really surprised at first. I saw it on his face. He just took the free rook, and then sorry for the arrows. And then I played the move d6 check, and yeah, then he realized what was going on and resigned. I basically just needed to move my rook away so I can get d6 in with tempo. I'm sure d6 is winning. I'm sure rook a7 is winning. Rook c7 is winning, but this is just a forced mate. Rook c8, he takes. He has to take. Again, because the king is on a8, and then d6 is going to be checkmate. He can give up his rook, but then it's mate next move. So I made 3 very serious mistakes this game, but I still ended up winning because I had this long-term advantage of the a pawn. It would have been way more interesting had he taken that pawn. He took about 5 or 10 minutes on that decision, and when he didn't take it, I sort of knew I was going to win because my advantage was too big. Thank you very much for watching. Let me know what you think of the game, and stay tuned for more chess. Bye bye.